Hello, this is Mike Swanson. You're listening to the Wall Street Window podcast. In a few moments, I'm going to play for you a recording of an interview I did with Carmine Savastano. Carmine is a researcher, an author, and editor-in-chief of the Neapolis Media Group. His writings have focused on intelligence, government, and international politics. If you've been a listener of my podcast, you know I've interviewed Carmine in the past. He's also the author of the book, Two Princes and a King, and is going to come out with another book in February titled Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature. In fact, you can go to Amazon if you type Human Time Bomb and pre-order that book now. That way you'll make sure you'll get it in February before anyone else does, for that matter. So the discussion I had with him was kind of a precursor to the publication of his book. It's a look at some of the research he's done about why people are violent, why does violence happen, whether it's organized violence or individual violence. And of course, violence touches into emotions, and boy, we seem to live in emotional times of disagreement, controversy, and discord. So perhaps our discussion touches on some of the reasons why this is the case. So one quick commercial break, and then our discussion with Carmine.
Go ahead, caller.
I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it, by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do a long introduction. I'm gonna record that.
Yeah, add it to the beginning.
Yeah. So, how you doing today, Carmine?
I'm doing good, Mike. Good to be back on the show.
Yeah, it's been a while since we last spoke, and you've been really busy. You've been working on a book that's going to come out next year called Human Time Bomb, and it's available for pre-order. And kind of linked to it, you just put an article up on your website, which I'm going to link to with the notes for this interview, about the origins of violence. Why are people so violent, and where does this come from?
Yeah, it was, as I've talked to you about before off air about the book, the thing that made me, and I'll do a quick plug, Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature, and as Mike said, it's available for pre-order on Amazon. You can go to tpaak.com, tpaak.com, and there's information about the book, frequently asked questions, and articles, which will be joined by additional ones in the future. But I have a background in, basically intelligence, studying human behavior, trying to figure out some of the more intricate things that have occurred within history that might still be eluding some of our understanding. And one of the things that I've attempted to do, as I was, when I finished the last book and I'd been, I had the opportunity to go and speak at a few places and talk to some experts, is that for as much as we understand about, the names, the places, the evidence in specifics, we don't necessarily understand a lot of the time the motivation. That's something that in whether it's tribal conflict in the past, political assassination in the past or the present, we don't really understand the base motivators a lot of the time of why these things happen. What allows for the environment to come to pass that allows for this large act of historical violence?
Well, I mean, to bring it to recent times, like, I guess the most mysterious violent event in the past couple years has been that shooter in Las Vegas that shot like 50 people, and the police and authorities have never come out with a definitive motive, even after having interviewed people who know him and so forth. But I can guarantee that this article you wrote, I don't know, that something in this article is the answer. I might not be able to tell you specifically what it is, but status, disgust, or fear, then some mixture of these three, or one of them being more important than the other, most likely, has to do with it.
There's certainly primal motivators, I think, that people overlook when they're trying to explain a complex situation, and we all do it. We want to attach meanings. We're pattern-seeking creatures, and that can be very useful because we can pick out patterns that might elude most people, but that also means that we're going to pick out bad patterns. And a lot of people want to attach more meaning to something occurring than actually happened, or they want to attach the wrong one. If it's somebody who you don't, let's say, like on a personal level, you're going to have reasons that you would attribute to what they did beyond probably what's the scope of the reality of what occurred, just because you don't like them. And we're all guilty of that. We're all going to attach, meanings to it. And that's how we get, into some of these historical myths that we have to debunk from time to time, is because people attach the wrong meaning, and then it gets passed on, and then the telephone game throughout history, and you arrive with a big mess that you have to pick through. But I think, it's important to, and that's what I'm endeavoring to do in some small part, at least, to pick apart what the primal motivators are, what we can see over and over in so many of these cases of violence, and how it's affecting us currently. Because I think that our society is, while overall, according to a lot of the studies I've looked at, violence historically has gone down overall.
Like crime rates.
Rates of rape and, theft and murder have gone down overall historically. But there's still huge problems where entire cities in what would functionally be called a first world country are basically almost as bad as a third world country. So we haven't escaped violence by any means. We've just contained it to certain areas. And it's still prevalent. It's still operating within all of us. Even if we're peaceful people and we don't actively become violent with other people, the urge is still within us. We still want to lash out. We might not lash out with our fists, but we might lash out elsewhere. Maybe we'll lash out online. Maybe we'll lash out, with a bad review about somebody, or we'll tell a lie about them and get that started and have a rumor affect them. There's lots of ways we can be aggressive.
Well, I wonder if you take out crime rates, is there more aggressive behavior of the sort you're talking about? People lashing out on the internet or wherever. Is that sort of thing creating more aggressive behavior than there was in the past?
I would imagine so. I mean, I don't know all the figures, but I would gather that, it didn't exist before then. So that's a whole new brand of aggression that has come into being. And it's expanding day by day as more and more people get online. And I don't want to cast technology as being evil. It's not. It's it's like anything. There are good and bad sides to it. I think when I was talking to our friend Chuck Ocelli about this, I called it the shadow side. There's the beneficial side to the internet, which is business applications, communication. It can allow people who are handicapped to communicate with people and get services that they normally wouldn't be able to. It can allow people that can't go somewhere for convenience to have food delivered. There's all sorts of good things. It allows communication between people. It can help with a relationship, staying in touch with someone, but it can't be the only part of a relationship, not an effective one socially. We need human contact. And I think that's where the shadow side comes in. Because the internet doesn't provide the necessary human contact, we don't make enduring social relationships. They're shallow relationships. They're people that you never actually meet, that you're never going to encounter in real life and interact with. And so to some extent, you're not going to have a deep attachment to them. It's one of the articles I was reading about I think it was from the Library of Congress, or it was from anyway, but the article was basically talking about that there's a difference between a desire and a need, and we desire contact with other people, but we also need it. So when you're trying to fulfill that desire merely on indirect human contact through the internet, you're not actually fulfilling the need. That's still going unfulfilled.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. So if someone is isolated or whatnot, and they're using the internet to get human contact, they can't help but do it, I guess. But then they can never
fully
fulfill the needs that they're trying to do.
Yeah, you need to see it's reflexive, and maybe it's just instinctual, but you at some time, not all the time, but sometimes you need to have a real life person who you can physically interact with, shake their hand, give them a hug, pat them on the shoulder, comfort them if they're upset, whose eyes you can look into and see reactions, read eye movement, facial expressions. We need that. We need other creatures. We can't forever exist in an isolated environment where pictures are nice and they can remind us and they can set off things in our mind to, bring us back to good memories, but they can't replace those memories.
Well, I'm getting worried, or I don't know, or feel or believe that more and more younger people nowadays have spent so much time on their screens, and I'm someone who grew up with the computer, so but I went out and played and did stuff. Yeah. But I'm worried that people spend so much time with this that they have a difficult time dealing with real people, or even interacting in the real world, so to speak, as opposed to the computer world or the internet.
And unfortunately, I think you're correct. I think that is happening, and the scientific data would go along with that happening. You see the upswing in anxiety rates, in depression rates, in suicide rates. You see that people are losing their minds over, not being accommodated in small ways in public. Where they say that they've been mistreated, or that the person's a bigot, or the person's a liar, or the person's evil, or they try to demonize them online because they didn't accommodate them in some way that they wanted. You even see celebrities doing it, just recently. And as you and I talked about off air, it's a growing infantilism. You see, for instance, who is it? There's so many of them, but basically pick whatever celebrity. You can go online, I'm sure, and find one now currently doing it. But you see celebrities pitching their audience to go after corporations or executives that don't do what they want with their contracts. It's like, you're millionaires. You can afford lawyers. Why don't you go hire one? How about the public doesn't have to do your dirty work for you? How about we buy your albums and that's enough? That's pretty crazy. We're not your slaves. We don't need to go and attack corporations for you.
Well, that's pretty wild. And I guess the people, if you're so into these celebrities or whatever, you're in groups that are about that. I guess, whatever. But
it's childlike thinking. It's infant-like thinking that you would let yourself be used like that.
Mm. Well, one thing I've noticed, I was telling you before the interview that since over 15 years now, I've played poker a couple times a year, like in poker tournaments. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed over the past couple years, some of the ways that the younger people at the tables now, and I was younger, their age, that they are now. But they are playing in a way that's kind of strange, that they don't seem to be able to read other people as well at the poker table, and reading players is an important part of the game. If you want to be good at it, there's all kinds of ways to play poker, different like strategies and stuff, and some of them come and go, and the terminology comes and goes. But when I first started playing, I was read a bunch of poker books. They're like, let's say 5 different ways that you could characterize someone's style of play, and one type of and different personalities could have a different way of playing or be attracted to a different way of playing. So when I started out, there was something called a systems player, and they were people that thought that there's some good, like you want to play certain hands, you want to do this and do that. And I kind of started out as such a person, but even if you were doing that, the books would tell you got to adjust to the way the other people are playing. It's good to read players, and it's not like there's a perfect one system or something. Yeah. But what happened was the other month I played in a tournament in Las Vegas, and there was 3 or 4 people at the table that started out, and they were playing in a way that I knew they were one of these younger people that they don't respond. They don't really react to the other players, what the other players are doing very well, and they can't really read people. And what they were doing is playing very conservative in a way. They were calling lots of hands, but not ever really betting a whole lot, which in a certain sense can be good. So one of these guys did very well, made like second place, while all the others just over time lost all their chips. But what happened was, I know there's this fad in poker called GTO poker. It's called Game Theory Optimal Poker. It's a couple years old, and it's what these people were doing. It's a strategy in which the people creating it, and I don't believe this is true, but they claim there's like a perfect way to play every single hand, and I would say it's an extreme form of this sort of systems poker, but they are literally selling it on people, saying if you just know this perfect way, that's all you need to know. And so I was reading some articles about it because I plan on playing again in a couple weeks, and I was like, well, I need to read what these people were basing their play on so I understand what they're doing. And the articles I was reading, some of them basically say you don't need to know you don't even need to know much. Forget about reading the person's behavior. You don't even need to know how they're playing their hands, which is really far out. So, but
it's like new age. It's like new age poker.
Yeah. Well, what it struck me is I think it's ridiculous to take these concepts that far, but I think they appeal. This appeals to younger players that have grown up, on the computer and the internet and all this kind of business, and don't have good social skills, aren't able to really read human body language that well, and they are, I think, clinging to this these ideas as a way to not try to learn how to be better at reading people and all these other skills. They're just like they're almost like crippling. I believe they're playing a crippling form of poker, but they are being pumped up to think this is actually the best way you can play. So I'm just kind of starting to ramble, but that's an example, I think, of it's just. I mean, well, I'll just tell you this one little story. Link more into what you're saying. One of the times this really made me really realize this is really getting crazy. The other year I was playing poker in a casino, which is out kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's not in a city. There's really nothing to do, and there's like hundreds of people playing this poker tournament, and this kid was playing, and he's under 25, and he had his phone and was saying he's going to go on a date. And I'm thinking to myself, well, there's, who are you going to go on a date with in a casino, in the middle of nowhere? So where'd you meet this girl, And he said he met him online on some website. I'm thinking, well, this has got to be I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, this has got to be a prostitute or something, And someone else at the table basically asked him that, and he
someone else have the politeness you did.
Yeah, asked and the guy's sitting next to me, this kid's sitting next to me, and someone else basically asked him that, and he says, oh no, she's not a prostitute, she's my girlfriend. And I'm just like, I'm just saying this is what I started thinking, man. These kids are really out there nowadays. I say kids, it's only 20 years ago I was this guy's age, but it's just like it's just like, whoa, but I'm thinking this is now playing over into a lot of these guys' poker games, and if it's doing that with people, how they're playing poker, how's it going on in the rest of their lives?
Yeah, well, and that I think is the major issue. No matter what exactly we've discussed even thus far, there's a lot of scientific data, and there's a lot of incidents, and I'm sure you and I have tons of anecdotal stories that we can tell that, and I'm sure everyone does, that they've seen overall changes that are now being marked in the scientific literature that have occurred. People are, on average, born after 2000, acting roughly 5 years younger, and it's usually more prevalent in males, but 5 years younger than they actually are emotionally, and that's because of, in part, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, do you know how they do the study? Is it like questions, or
they did questioning about their activities, and then they did behavior. So okay. Like, for instance, one of the comparisons I was reading about is, I believe it was 8th graders it was 1998 were more socially active than 20 and 18 to 20-year-olds are now. 8th graders. So people who are like 14, 13 years old went out more in the 90s than basically young adults do now. And it's not because young adults now young adults have less sex now. It's not because they're pure. It's because they have less opportunities for social engagement, because they don't go out as much, because they don't encounter as many people, so they don't have as many chances.
Well, I know, because I had some involvement in some body shop businesses. And one of the things we read once, is that younger people nowadays,
they don't drive much.
Yeah, only 50% of them that turn 16 go and get a license.
Yeah.
And the statistic was that our age, me and you are the same age, over 90%, there's like 95% of people, as soon as they turn 16, they wouldn't got driver's license. Now it's 50% of them get one. When I was in high school, I only knew like 2 or 3 people who didn't have a driver's license, and we thought they were weird.
Yeah.
And, now it's like whatever, but I guess they don't want to go anywhere.
Well, it's freedom, and I think that honestly there is. I don't want to get too much into the possible philosophical discussion, but I think there is less ambition to be free. There is less ambition to have personal freedom and personal responsibility. They don't want to have to go and spend the money to buy a
Well,
car.
that's when I first heard this number and was talking about it with friends of mine, it's easy to say, come to the quick conclusion, which is probably what we did. These people are just lazy.
No, not even lazy, but I just
but
think
it's
they're not.
something going on, something.
Yeah. No, I
something
don't think. Yeah, I don't think it's lazy. When I say like personal responsibility and personal freedom, I'm not saying laziness. I'm just saying
right.
it's okay.
Well, I thought that a
Oh,
couple years ago.
well, no, and you know what though? I'm sure there are some people, because on average there's going to be some lazy people. I don't think it's the majority. I think the majority of young people, they're not pressed to go out and pursue that anymore. At least not in a major way that I see.
Right.
They're not pressed by their parents to want to be ambitious and go and take their share of personal freedom on the way to becoming an adult. Like that's a step to becoming an adult, is getting a driver's license, because that allows you to then control your transportation. It then makes you have to be responsible for being places on time and learning how to get there on time, not having to drive like a maniac, having to watch out for what other people do on the road and their safety and your safety. There's a lot of things that go along with it. It doesn't seem like much, but being able to drive a car is a big deal. And if you don't do that, if you wait to do that, then you're not going to advance as fast as your peers. And when that doesn't happen, there's going to be all sorts of other prices.
So I'm just guessing this driving thing links into the study, or
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just one of the many activities that people 20 years ago at 16 would have done that now it's taken them into their 20s to do.
Yeah. So then the slower development. What was it? 5 years?
Well, on average, it was 5 years, and then unfortunately for we males, already before this 5 year extra got added on after 2000, it was already about 1 to 3 years males were behind emotionally development anyway, because women usually at a younger age have to be involved in more caring for others.
So,
helping
so then is the cause of it then is that the people they're not doing as much, they're not going out as much, they're just not experiencing as much to learn from them, and they're just stuck in their house playing with the gizmos, I guess. Is that the cause of it?
Well, I think that's definitely technology is a big factor in it, but there's a lot of things at play. I think that for instance, the educational system, in my opinion, has gotten worse. And I would say that most of the statistics would line up with that as well. You can see, I think, what was it? And I certainly don't, this doesn't have to be nationally. I'm sure there are a small amount of states that have gotten better. But overall, most American education has gotten worse in the last 20 years, and it had gotten worse at that point from the 20 years prior. We've taken I don't know if it's been done intentionally, but systematically, whether intentional or not, we have taken out very important things out of our educational system and never replaced them with anything that could serve as a serviceable replacement for it. For instance, we used to teach Latin in schools, which, once again, people might not think it's a big deal, but it is, because that is the primary language in which science and medicine and many things are still spoken. And law, there's a lot of things that are still rendered in Latin, and it's a useful language. And we got rid of it because people didn't want to teach it, or they got tired of it, I guess. But so that was just plucked out, and all those skills were taken away. And then later on, civics followed. All the reasons why people don't understand what's going on in our government. Why are our politics so complex and messed up? Who knows? We just pluck that right out of the system. We keep pulling out these integral things, and people then are less educated, and we wonder why they're less educated. So that was already in play before this even started happening. Then you add the 2000s. So now they don't even want to do the basic things. I mean, we're suffering on English and math, which Americans were doing quite well, I would think, 20 years ago. Better than we are now, certainly. So we're paying prices in all sorts of ways, I think, that link back to this infantilism, this creeping infantilism that is coming over our country, and it's just making us less and less able to deal with future problems. Like, the younger you are, the less better you're able to cope. So if everyone's emotionally stunted and they can't cope with things, what's going to happen in 20 years from now? I mean, what are children going to look like then? And who are our leaders going to be? What sort of breakdown, I need a safe space, I can't deal with this kind of leaders are we going to have? You don't have time to go to your safe space when nuclear war is on the table. You don't have time to relax when a country's threatening to invade. So this is what these years are for. You're supposed to be developing your adult skills by the time you get there. You don't have time to learn them on the fly. Anyway,
Well,
I'm a little passionate about it because I've researched about it.
No, well, it is amazing. I mean, well, I've read a book recently, and one book I'm reading. I read books all the time, but anyway, one book I'm reading now. It's about the Vietnam War, and it's some veteran giving his experience. But one of the things the guy does, which is kind of interesting, is the first 2 chapters he talks about rock and roll music, and basically is making the argument that he grew up in the 50s and early 60s, and rock and roll music was in the car were huge for his generation. Mm-hmm. And those 2 things in his life, the way he saw it, impacted the entire 1960s and 1970s, and so forth. And me growing up, I listened to rock and roll music, but it wasn't a new thing, it was just entertaining or whatever. It wasn't as big of a deal as it was.
Memories that formed around them with your family and stuff that probably were the big deal. Yeah.
Well, exactly. But the rock and roll music for me and you was not a new thing. It was already created by the generation before us.
Yeah.
So I never really thought about it. I mean, I just took rock and roll music for granted. But reading this guy's book made me think, oh, wow. So what was the big thing that came in my lifetime? And as I said, when I was young, my dad bought an Apple II computer, mm-hmm. and I played on it, and we had an Atari and these different game consoles and so forth. And but I still played with kids. It went outside, and did stuff. But I was very heavy into computers, and I actually had a bulletin board, or I had a dial-up modem, and I was calling computer bulletin boards, which went away. But the turning point, and I was reading some book a few weeks ago that makes this claim, and I was like, wow, this is exactly what happened to me. So the book claimed that 1995 was the turning point. And what happened to me in 1995 is I got on the internet for the very first time. There was no graphics and no browsers and all that. It was just text. But what happened was I got on there and I was chatting with somebody in another country, like in Europe, and I was like, I've never done that before. Like a live chat now, who cares? But then it was like, well, this is never done anything like that before. And I told one of my friends, what I did, and they had to come over and see this. And they got on there, and he started talking to some girl somewhere, I think. So this dude got stuck on the, and I'm thinking, I don't want to talk to I don't know if it's really a girl, so I didn't want to do something like that. But this guy was talking to this girl, and got stuck in his seat for 12 hours.
Yep. It took about 5 minutes flat for romance to bloom on the internet.
So the next day, this dude goes home. The next day, another friend of mine comes over. He gets on this thing. He is on there chatting with people for 20 hours straight.
Needless to say, it's obsessive. In case the listener hasn't
Well,
caught on.
but we never experienced anything like this. This is totally new, and the next couple years, go to college and whatnot, and get used to using the internet. But it just the importance of it in people's lives just grew and grew and grew from that starting point in 1995 to what it is today. I mean, in 1995, there are no cell phones. People weren't walking around with cell phones, So, but that's I buy the argument. That was the turning point, 1995. Just as the car and rock and roll music was the big things, in the 50s, this is it.
Yeah, well, and then that's the larger question too. I think that needs to be asked. That I talk about in the book, and I'm sure we're going to talk about now and in future episodes. But the big question is, what are the long-term effects? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know what the long-term effects are because we're in it. We didn't wait to implement all of this new technology into our societies. We just did it because it seemed like a good idea.
Well,
and now we're paying the price in some ways.
By the time I got to be 30, I sometimes started to wonder if the internet wasn't having a bad impact on my own brain, making it harder to concentrate as I had in the past. But as time has gone on, I've tried to not use it as much, just a few hours a day, and I don't use cell phones like most people do, and try to make changes.
Me either. I'm another weirdo like you. I told Chuck the other day, I'm like, I only use my cell phone to call people, and I'll answer texts that I receive, but I'm not texting people all the time. I don't have any applications. I don't look at social media on my cell phone. I do everything on a PC when I have to, and that's it. And I think that has spared me from some of the consequences that people are suffering from now, because it is, in my opinion, dishonest to say, and I'm sure that a lot of these corporations will say it that utilize the services, to say that you are not affecting people by constantly having them online. It can be proven. I mean, there's actual psychological disorders that talk about obsession with the internet, there's what was it? Ben Stein's son got put into rehab for internet pornography or gaming addiction. There's people that have been put into rehab for pornography addiction. It's obsessive. That's what it is. It's a good tool, but like any tool, you have to put it down after a while. You don't just cling to it like those people that used it the first time at your place. There are people now. The first time I understood, I still 20 hours, even 5 hours, even a couple hours would be to me too long, but to do that the first time might make sense, but there are people that do that every day. There is no escape for them. They don't try to engage elsewhere. They have found everything they need. And that's the dangerous thing about it, is that the internet, largely, if you know what you're doing, is curated to your preferences. So that's not reality you're looking at. I mean, there's some websites that are real that you can go and look at and they're actually credible. But some of it isn't. Some of it is curated to your preference. So you're not going to see everything. You're going to see what you want to see, and you're going to see the views you want to hear, unless you seek out opposing views.
Well, and then it's designed to try to capture your attention at all times. The advertisements are designed to do that, everything on there. So the way it's designed is to keep you online.
Yeah. It's the TV that never turns off.
Yeah. Well, how is this? We might have to save it for the follow-up. But how is this connected to violence? So maybe we should...
Well, I'll wrap it. I'll try to tie a bow around it. So basically, how this would be connected to violence is obsession, the obsessiveness of this, and the obsessiveness of the medium. For instance, with the internet, and this can be put into other mediums too, it can be put into social groups, a lot of other things, but the obsessiveness of it keeps you locked in, right? So you're getting your curated version of what everything is. So now apply that to politics or contentious issues. And that's where it leads to violence, because it makes the perfect medium to organize groups to go and protest and counter-protest to anyone you want. It makes the perfect medium to get people mad and going after other people. It allows them, like doxing, where they go after someone's personal information and spread it around the internet. It plays so wonderfully into horrible things. And that's why it can be both a tool but also dangerous, because it can be misused, and people often misuse it. And it's in our nature as humans to want revenge not even when they wrong us, but when we feel like they wronged us. So even if they didn't, if we feel like they did, we want revenge. So all of this plays into it. It allows you a nameless, faceless ability to attack people you don't like. And any group that operates like that is going to get violent. The Ku Klux Klan, Antifa, any masked group of people who don't have to pay a price and don't have to have their identity exposed are going to act unconscionably, because they can, because nobody can do anything unless they actually confront them. And that's what the internet unfortunately sets up in some cases. It allows people to anonymously attack other people and never have to pay a price for things they'd never do in real life, because in real life, you have the consequence of violence. You have the consequence of being shamed in person. So I think that's where it all can lead to violence.
Well, we'll have to do a follow-up and get into some more details on how fear, disgust, and status operate. And the disgust one's real interesting, because I never thought about that until you mentioned it, actually. So that
disgust is a huge one as far as.
Yeah, I never really thought of it. So, but I know I'm taking a lot of your time.
Oh, no. I'm glad to be here.
We'll have to do a follow-up interview soon and get deeper into this.
Great, yeah. Yeah, we'll do a follow-up and we'll get into fear, disgust, and status.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.